Hello, my name is Sharon Soliday, and I'm with the Hello Foundation, and I'm talking to you today as a speech pathologist on presenting to others, how to keep other specialists engaged. I get this question, actually, the reason I thought we should go ahead and do this topic is I've had other people say, you know, Sharon, I enjoy coming to your presentations, they're very engaging, they're very lively, and what tips do you might have for me in terms of if I'm always too nervous or I just want to read from my PowerPoint, what should I be doing if I'm talking to my school staff or to my discipline about any number of topics? Or even outside, it's hard to imagine, but yes, we do have lives. There are other places, whether it's to your local school or your PTA group or to your wine club. That's a fun one. It's always good to have some confidence in knowing that you're presenting. So the slides, I'm just going to have you, we can proceed to the next slide. And my first question actually goes back to you. So what is it that you want to learn today? What do you want to make sure that I talk about at all? So this is the part where you have to put your hands on the keyboard and actually send a little question or comment to the board so that I can get a feel for what you're doing and what you're interested in. For example, I have sort of set out a series of 5 or 6 strategies we're going to talk about in a few minutes of things you could be doing, but that may not be something of interest to you at all. So, for example, some people may call me and say, how do I even just get over the first 2 minutes of starting when that's not something I was going to be chatting about? So any hopes, dreams, or expectations, or something you just might want to know personally. The board is not lighting up. So let's go ahead and move forward. Now I got to tell you, this is going to play into something that we do in a little bit. So if you don't comment here, we're going to be okay. You'll find my perspective perhaps a bit interesting. Okay, so let's start with why do we even bother talking about this topic? And I love the Seinfeld episode in which he more or less explained to people when it comes to phobias, people have a greater fear of speaking in public than they do dying, which means if you're at a funeral, you would actually prefer to be in the coffin versus giving the eulogy, which I thought was a pretty dramatic but humorous take on why the anxiety that a lot of people carry when it comes to presenting. And also, I have to say there's an additional anxiety level I feel when you're presenting to your professional peer group. You really don't want to look like an idiot. I mean, you feel you have some confidence in the work that you're doing, but as speech pathologists, we're fairly sheltered and isolated, and so it can be very concerning if you want to step out of that comfort zone and take a risk and share information with other people. So the next comment has to do with a reason to kind of practice and think about this topic is that specialists, for as intimidating as they might feel to us personally, they're actually some of the worst listeners. I really liked this quote from the University of Colorado that talked about really how lots of people in general are poor listeners. The irony, this is what we work with many of the students that we serve, but people are typically in the listening process, not just being present and listening. Now I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you're not texting and checking email, even though you might be doing that during this presentation. But I think that when you also tend to just take those variables out, people are already thinking about what do they want to say in response. So they're listening, but it's really from their perspective. They're not really thinking about, okay, well, how could somebody else be perceiving this, and how could I be adjusting my discussion for that? And so you have to be guarded that even though you have a certain anxiety about presenting, your listeners are bringing a certain amount of difficulty for you to the table. So how are you going to deal with that presentation? And thank you, Amanda. I appreciate, I definitely have some suggestions for your question about testing. We'll come back to that and I'll address that for sure. Okay, so in addition to what I just talked about, here's the reasons why and when you should be presenting to others. Because a lot of people would say to me when I first mentioned this topic, they said, well, Sharon, I never present. And I'm like, on the contrary, you present a lot more than you realize. Sometimes it's a small group within, such as an IEP meeting, but it also can be, to a large discipline within a district, or to a staff meeting, a group of teachers, or at a parent night, kind of talking about what you do. So I listed just some examples that I feel is making the world a smaller place and really demanding more of us, whether we're assistants or we're speech pathologists or even a part of another specialist profession, where more and more the expectation beyond our technical expertise is really the ability to do consultation and collaboration with others. And that consultation and collaboration definitely is a skill set that has to be practiced. So, and it's getting easier. The world is also a much smaller place. That's the last thing I wanted to say. And the point when I talk about technology and networking, there is now no longer a geographic boundary that's placed on us in order to share the information that we have. You never know where you're going to get questions from. Okay, so masters of being distracted. That's who we are as speech pathologists. I want you can type in this and send it to me, or you can keep it on a little post-it with where you're at by yourself. These will not be collected. But, what's on your mind right now? I want stop and think about, okay, what am I bringing to the table? Because if any of you are truly just totally dialed into me, I'm way impressed. And you should be giving this presentation on listening, because it's very difficult to do. For example, I'm thinking about my sister. I'm juggling that. She is about 6-7 months pregnant and had some early contractions and was at the doctor this morning. And I'm thinking about that. And I'm thinking about dinner with my mother tonight. And I'm thinking about, what my report I have to finish up that I'm going to talk about in another minute or two, that I'm kind of figuring out how to present that to the larger team, because the child has some unique needs. So what are you thinking about? And I really appreciate Kimberly's question about what are creative ways to follow up with staff and specialists after you've presented. That's a really good one, because that'll definitely play into it. So we'll come back to that, Kimberly. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I'm on slide 6 now. So these are called strategies to keep everyone engaged, according to Sharon Soliday. And the first one is really, like I asked you, find out what they want to know and what they expect to learn. I do this at the beginning of every presentation, whether I'm talking to 6 people or whether I'm talking to 200 people. And I say, what is it that you want out of this? Because I'll tell you from personal experience, I am notorious for attending a conference with this idea in my head of like, well, I am definitely hoping she covers X, Y, and Z, because if she doesn't, my money, I will not have gotten my money's worth. Well, that's almost a setup to the speaker. She has a right to understand what I'm coming to the table with, wanting to hear about. So I put it out on the table and I ask people, what is it that you want to learn? Which kind of how I was trying to model at the beginning of this presentation, because I know if you're going to reflect whether or not this was worth your time or not, I definitely want to address those things. So I have a whiteboard or a giant piece of paper, and I write those expectations. And some people, I kind of make light of it, try not to make it too serious, because for some people, even presenting in a large group of what they want to get out of it can be intimidating. Now, I'm very comfortable with sounding like an idiot when I'm in a group of people if it's something I really need to understand. And I also was taught in the 2nd grade that, Sharon, whatever question you have, chances are 3 other people in the room have a similar question. So it's okay to put that forward. So I have the list of things on here, and then as I go through, I will say, okay, does this adequately answer in the time that we've had what you wanted to know? And most of the time people say, yes, that's very helpful. Thank you for the tip. Some of the time, I'll say follow up with me, and I'm happy to share more information, or more importantly, connect you to someone else who has a better idea than me, and then I can learn something also. So don't feel that by putting this expectation of what do you want to know out there means you have to have every answer on the spot. It just means that you're trying your best to really address the needs and interests of the group. Number 2, know and cater to your audience. Specialists are super smart people, and we kind of know we're super smart people. And I describe it as, one of the comments I repeatedly hear from folks, ironically, repeatedly, is that they say, I wish the speaker would have just gotten to the point and told me what it is I was supposed to know. I really did not need to have it paraphrased 5 times for me to get it. And we tend to be, as speech assistants or speech therapists or other specialists in the field working with kids, very anxious within a building because there's so much that has to get done. And sometimes in a presentation, we just really want that. We've been operating at this, sort of type A, get through this list of to-do things, and we want information presented in the same way. The speaker might have a very different idea. The irony in my mind is that we teach teachers how to present information to kids in 4 different ways. And so sometimes a speaker, you may be presented to do that. But at the same time, in reality, you really these people kind of have a context of what you're talking about, presuming you're talking to other specialists. And so to keep them engaged, don't dwell on the point, which I've probably now said too many times. So that's called irony. Okay, so strategy number 1, before we get to some of your questions, actually 3, is use stories. For example, I tried to use the Seinfeld example. That also plays in with number 4, using examples from a shared experience. Seinfeld's a show that a lot of people watch. I also love Modern Family, but maybe not as many people know the Modern Family episode, so it was easier to just kind of reference something culturally that we all shared. Another story I'm going to share with you is that you want to identify what we share in common. And a lot of us, since we work with little kids or we have little kids, can relate to the fact that my little brother, he's 30 now, but has a son who has difficulties with his speech. And I've worked with him some, and he's working with a speech therapist, and he has made great improvement. And as evidence of this improvement, he walked in the other day and he said, "Mom, now we've moved in the last year and a half from one word to complete sentences, and now this is what you get because of it. Mom, look, isn't it great? I got a pistachio in my nose." And so that resulted in my sister-in-law knowing exactly what was going on very quickly. So she was grateful for the speech improvement. But behaviorally, of course, my brother, my little nephew, had a pistachio wedged up in his nose. So as a freebie, I'm going to tell you how she got that out. She took him to the ER because the doctor said, you never know if it's way up there, they have to put him out. But, bless all the nurses of the world. She said, "Oh, no, we've got this covered. You took it infant CPR. You close one side of his nose, and he's laying down, and as the mom, you come down and you blow really hard into his mouth, and out shot the pistachio onto her face, all mucus covered." She said it truly was one of the nastiest moments of her life, but she was able to reflect. The good news is, that's all it took to get it out because his speech had improved. And I thought that was a pretty funny story. So keep people engaged by telling stories. Everybody wants to know a little lesson or something humorous, something that is going to break the ice all the way around. And if you're willing to sort of make yourself look foolish in the moment and tell a story about yourself, you actually can gain credibility. You're not going to lose credibility with the audience because it shows that you're confident enough to show that, we all make mistakes. The 4th point, use examples from their own experience. This is where we really move away from the realm of story to keeping people engaged to actually content. You want to have some meat associated with what you're talking about. For example, in order to do this part successfully, you want to identify the stakeholders. So really, who am I talking to? Am I in a group of other speech therapists, or am I in a group of parents and I'm trying to share information? I have a small group experience where I am going to be presenting some evaluation results for a child with some very special needs very soon. And I was a little anxious because he's a little guy and I haven't done a little guy assessment in a while. And then I find out his mother is a speech pathologist. Well, if anything's going to increase your anxiety, it's the fact that mom has got her act together and knows what you're supposed to be doing. But because of that, I'm really staying positive and thinking, wow, mom is going to be pretty dialed in as to what I am really looking at. And so I'm approaching her directly saying, what is it that you're expecting from this evaluation? And what is it that you need more information about? And so once I feel mom and I are having that good conversation, I can really draft a report that reflects where this child's at. And when I present it to the team, I'm really going to be able to present it with mom's perspective as well, which I think will carry a lot of weight. So keep in mind that, the context matters, and being able to share a shared experience that everybody understands is one of the real benefits you have if you're working with other specialists involved, because they know what you do. Versus someone you meet on the plane who says, oh, you work on S&Z. So now the next strategy is to keep people busy. If they're going to be distracted, you want them distracted with what you are talking about. So here's a good example. I took this from another clinician years ago, and I've used it in a lot of different contexts, and it's been highly successful. And now I'm going to share with all of you. So if you would take a piece of paper, and I would like you to fold it vertically. I think that's the word I want. Also known in elementary schools as hot dog style. And so, hurry up and do this. Or if you do this online, I'm never going to know. Again, we're not collecting this work. But we're going to spend a minute or two on this. I want you to take the left-hand side and label 1 to 10. And then on the right-hand side, label 1 to 10. And I noticed someone even in the room with me is not doing this activity, but she's busy monitoring the board, so all will be forgiven. On the left-hand side, I want you to put on your clinical hat, your assistant or your speech therapist or your OT hat, whatever specialist hat you're wearing. And I would like you to write down, here's the scenario. I'm going to tell you the scenario. Let's say your client has just had, let's say, a traumatic brain injury and is having difficulty communicating, high school student. And so you're putting together a device or a communication board or something with only 10 items. Now, just roll with me for the sake of examples. Write down 10 things that you feel they should be able to communicate. Okay, so take 20 seconds or so. I want you to write that down. I'll give you a clue. Yes and no would be two good ones to have on that list of 10. So if this person just has a little communication book of 10 items they can communicate, what would you include? Are you doing this activity? Yes, she is.
I am.
I'm so proud of her. So, give you another minute or so. And while you're doing this, I'll stress part of the reason you want to give folks an activity is that if they are texting or they are doing their own email or they're writing notes so intensely they're missing the next item, having a physical task to actually do to bring a group together or to demonstrate a point is an excellent thing to do. Okay, so let's presume you have at least 8 down, and now I would like you to take off that specialist hat and turn that other page back so you don't see it. And you've got the right side now, which should be the only side you see, and it's numbered 1 to 10. Now let's say something happened to you, and there were only 10 things. God forbid, something happened to you, whether it's a stroke or an accident or something, and you've landed on an alien planet maybe, and there's only 10 things. Forget the alien planet, that's not really a good example. Let's say you're still in the context of your real life. What 10 things would you personally want to communicate? So don't think about the first list, think about yourself personally. And so jot those down pretty quick. Sometimes those 10 actually come a little faster than the first 10 you created. And it's still reasonable to want yes and no on your list. Okay, of course you can volunteer if you would like and write on the board some of the main differences that you saw. But I have to tell you, on my first list of 10, typically it's things like yes and no, I'm not feeling well, different locations of maybe the body to indicate pain if I've been in an accident or this person has been in an accident. Basic needs such as hungry, tired, those concepts are good to include. I need to use the restroom, that's always a good one to include. On my personal list of 10 items, it's very different. I love you, or leave me alone. I want to read my book. These are my personal interests. And I do this activity for a couple of reasons. One, it's a very good reminder that we often do not, sometimes we need to wear more than just the therapist hat. So someone may say, I want to, include these basic needs into a potential communication system. But I use this example to say, as the therapist, my responsibility is to advocate for the client or the child, whatever their need may be. And sometimes that might be including on the list of 10, I'm really pissed off, like that phrase, I'm really pissed off, because maybe it's age appropriate or it's reasonable to have a statement of anger. And that really having to juggle between those two hats, necessities and personal interests, that's what makes our job interesting, but also challenging at the same time. Now, I'm fairly certain if you did do this little activity, you're pretty tuned in. And after an hour from now, or maybe 2 hours, and you'll reflect back, if someone said, hey, was that hello live thing worth tuning in today? You could say, well, I did this funky little activity. It was pretty helpful. That might be the one thing you come back to because you've actually done something with it. Now I'm going to give you another example that you can actually, as a takeaway, do this with your own school staff or with parents. I've done it in a group of 2, and I've done it with a group of 100. So you just have to modify it. The idea is you're trying to demonstrate, I'm typically trying to demonstrate to people, what does it really mean to have a language learning disability? And so I took this also, this was not an original idea, I took it from a learning disability video that was just excellent in terms of putting people through different activities to give them the sense of what it felt like to have a disability. So for a language learning disability, I tell people we are going to tell a story in the group, and I'm going to just point. So you don't know when I'm coming at you, but I'm going to point to you and you say the next sentence in the story. Everybody understand? And it should have a beginning and a middle and an end and a main character and some supporting details. Now, based on that, everybody got it and everybody goes, oh yeah, I understand. And I say, okay, now the only rule is you cannot use the letter N. N as in Nancy. And so then all of a sudden people are a little thrown off. Well, when you start randomly pointing to people, trying to get the story is awful. I mean, people are doing the same strategies our kids do. Sometimes they sit with a sentence in their head and they say, this is a sentence I'm going to say, whether or not it makes any sense in the moment. But it actually doesn't have an end, so they're following the rule. Other times people just say a sentence and it has an end and they don't care and everybody else laughs at them. But the idea is that thinking difficulty, trying to track what's happening in the room and the story and put your own thoughts together is very difficult, but it's a great activity and always has been well received by staff when I talk about really creating an opportunity to make them feel like they're struggling. So that's like a staff in-service kind of activity. And now I'm going to talk about my the last slide, really to embrace the risk you're taking, and then I'm going to go to questions. The number one suggestion I have for when you're presenting to other specialists, because it can be intimidating, is to really let go of your own ego. I am a very confident person, and I have often been told too confident in certain situations. But for the most part, it served me more than it hasn't, and so I tend to roll with that. But I've also been better served when I'm able to just take off that shield and really be open to failure and open to risk of being wrong. Because when you put yourself out there, you'll really gain the trust of others, but also have a sense of it's okay, you don't have to have every answer. And sometimes that in and of itself is a good way to understand what's going on. So for example, I was in a yoga class once and the instructor did not show up, which was very unusual because the instructor is always there. Well, something had happened and this woman in the back said, I'm not real great, but I would like to step forward and try to lead the class. And so we all said, sure, why not? So she got up and, it was painful. It made me appreciate the yoga instructor at a minimum. But I have to tell you, a couple of people left the class and I stuck it out because I thought, this is really going to make me kind of figure out how much of an understanding of this topic do I have? How well can I follow her? What are things, it's an opportunity for me to really do some self-reflection when someone else kind of demonstrates how to let that ego go and try to just do something good for the order. So I think if you're trying to do something good for the order, I think other people by nature are going to be pretty trusting and encouraging. So before I get to the last point of circling back, which is how you should always end a presentation, I want to get to some of the questions. Let's first start with Amanda in Wyoming. Shout out, hello Wyoming. Glad you're with us. Thanks for being here. I've noticed parents, teachers zone out when I go over testing results and give suggestions at meetings. Any suggestions? Wow, I wish I could say, Amanda, that this is an uncommon experience and no one here can relate. But unfortunately, they all can relate. I often think, my own theory, that people zone out when I'm going over results because they really do not understand what I'm talking about. They don't understand, even teachers, standard scores and what that means in relationship to the average. And unfortunately, it's really our responsibility to build that bridge. So when I talk about standard scores, I try to reflect back to what this means for your classroom. So for example, here's a kid who is going to qualify because his scores are in for reading or for language expression. It might be higher for what he understands, but it's like in the 50s for language expression. So really what that means in your classroom is that he may understand the directions that he's supposed to follow, but when it comes time for him to explain the story to you or to put something in his own words or to apply it to something else for new application, he is not going to do it. He's going to fall apart. That's really, and then to even go beyond that and to say, this difficulty, this level 50 is really down here, way beyond the low end of average range. So even kids you may have had in the past that really struggle, but they eventually get it if you explain it 2 or 3 different ways, he's not going to. He's going to need something different. His therapy really should be individualized to him, but still keep into account the goal that you want in the classroom. So you may go over it 3 and 4 times for that kid who just is kind of a low kid, needs a little more instruction. I'm going to have to break it down and then go over each one of those expectations of how you share information or how you apply it to a new context, maybe 3 or 4 different ways for him to get just that small piece. And then, we'll piece those all together. So you were super smart to refer him for assessment because he's really not getting it. And he's going to need a lot of support. But he won't need support in this area, whatever that might be, because. So really translating it to their experience and their expectation and knowledge can really help them tune in because they know what you're talking about. I also put suggestions in writing, and I use actual examples. Like like here on your dinosaur diorama, instead of just giving him oral instructions, you might give him written instructions that look like this and then have like directions color-coded or something so he can follow that sequence. They need to really see that. In many ways, our teachers are not much different from the kids we serve. We need to adapt material to really show things to them. So thank you, Amanda. I hope that met your expectation or what you wanted to know. Hi, Kimberly. Creative ways to follow up with staff and specialists after we've presented. Okay, here's where I let go of my ego. I've gone into classrooms after the fact. So let's say I've presented information about a student and I share similar to what I just shared. A week later, I might go into the classroom and say, since I talked and explained like what you would probably see in the classroom, have you seen examples of that, or was I right about that? Because, I always want to make sure I may be wrong about that. And so really presenting it as a self-reflection of, am I on the right page for expectations in your classroom, and am I on the right page for what this disability, how it manifests for you? Most of the time teachers say, oh yeah, ever since you pointed out like that, I really realized when we do X, Y, or Z, that's when he falls apart. And so here's what I have to do. Or they'll say, here's where he falls apart. And you might say, well, that is so helpful to know. I can come up with another idea or two to try to reflect on that. So I think trying to guess and anticipate what they want, but then go back and do the checking again and giving them some time to sort of process and see it in action in the classroom, and then you can present information in different formats. And really, I'm a firm believer that teachers need things the way teachers need them. Some of them want it in an email. Some of them need an assignment as an visual example. Some of them need a little webinar video they can watch to get a better idea. So really meeting them on their own turf is an important piece of it. If they show an interest, I would definitely ask them how they want to get the information. And Lori, we're almost done, folks. Thanks for holding on. Lori from Canby writes, thinking about how our students are required to present more and more these days in school, how I've been helping students with speeches lately. This is what was on your mind, Lori, when I asked. Now I get it. It wasn't so much a question. And really, it begs the comment, though, that there is a speaking and listening content standard within our elementary through high schools for our students, and more kids are being expected to present. So how do we encourage them to be successful and take that risk? So thanks for doing that. Okay, what length of a presentation makes sense? What's best? 30 minutes, 50 minutes, what? I find that people have a very short attention span. I have a funny story about this, actually, because I know a speech pathologist, I happen to marry him, who recently presented in Mississippi, and he is frantic about time. If he says bathroom break is over at 12:01, you better be sitting in your seat at 12:01 with a pen in your hand and ready to take notes because he's about to lecture. Well, Mississippi, time is different in the South, and he went on this way for 3/4 of a day, and this older gentleman said to him in the final afternoon break, he said, "Are all you people the same up north?" And Frank said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, time. That time is really important to you." And he says, "It's not so important to us. You know, we're a little more flexible." And Frank says, "Well, how much time should I be thinking?" And another woman popped in and said, "Well, you have to follow, the preacher's model. And the preacher's model is you talk for 20 minutes and then you take a breath and you can, sing a song or do something as a group, but 20 minutes is your limit because after that, no one's listening." And everybody laughed and said, "I appreciate that. I am going to take that in mind." And he was smart enough to include some more flexibility when it came to time from that point forward, because things just operated differently there where he was at. But with that in mind, I do think you can't go a real long time. There's a reason Hello Live intentionally is scheduled as 30-minute sessions, because in reality, we know you're busy, but the flip side of that is we know you're not going to pay attention for that long. So our goal is that if you're going to do a longer presentation, you have to break it up with activities, with stories, with things that people are doing to actively engage them, self-reflection pieces, role-playing pieces. I did a 3-day thing in Germany with the Department of Defense several years ago, and believe me, there was a lot of interaction because the thought of me lecturing them for 3 days, we all would have been drinking by the end of the second. So you just have to keep those things in mind. How much can people really take? Especially if you're not going on and on about the same thing. Lesson number 2 we talked about. So I hope this was helpful and addressed a lot of the questions or your expectations that you had. I really appreciate you taking the time to tune into Hello Live and hear what we have to offer. You can print your certificate at, there's a print button, I believe, below. So you can have that for your continuing professional education development hours. And if you have any questions, you can always follow up with us. So thank you again for your time, and I hope you have a great day.